The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people settled into their seats. The judge's bench loomed over the room, a symbol of authority and, for some, intimidation. Marcus, a well-dressed black man, stood confidently at the defendant's table, his posture straight and his gaze unwavering. His tailored suit and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the look of disdain on Judge Simmons's face. She tapped her gavel once, silencing the remaining whispers. "Let's get this over with," she muttered, barely masking her annoyance. "I don't have all day for nonsense." Marcus raised an eyebrow but remained silent, waiting for her to proceed. He had seen this look before, the dismissive glare, the condescending tone. It wasn't new to him. Judge Simmons leaned forward. "People like you always think the rules don't apply, always looking for an easy way out." Her voice dripped with contempt. A few gasps echoed through the room. The court stenographer hesitated for a brief moment before continuing. Marcus remained calm, though the insult didn't go unnoticed. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said, his tone measured. "You heard me," she snapped. "You people are always trying to manipulate the system, thinking you can just waltz in here and get special treatment." A heavy silence filled the room. Even the Hawaii bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Marcus took a slow, deliberate breath. He had faced prejudice before, but never this blatant in a courtroom. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small badge and held it up for the entire room to see. "I had hoped to be treated fairly today," he said, his voice carrying authority. "But it looks like I'll have to remind you who I really am." "Judge," Simmons scoffed, her lips curling into a smirk as she leaned back in her chair. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. She barely glanced at the badge, dismissing it as some trivial attempt to challenge her authority. Marcus remained composed, placing the badge on the defendant's table where it gleamed under the courtroom lights. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Reed with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said clearly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The courtroom fell deathly silent. The prosecutor, flipping through papers, froze. The bailiff straightened, his posture. Even the spectators leaned forward, eyes widening. Judge Simmons rolled her eyes and let out a dry chuckle. "Nice try," she sneered. "Do you really expect me to believe that? You think flashing a fake badge will get you out of this?" Marcus didn't flinch. He reached into his other pocket calmly, pulling out an official ID. He took a step forward and placed it on the bench in front of the judge. "You're welcome to verify it, Your Honor," he said, his tone unwavering. Judge Simmons hesitated. She glanced at the ID, her smirk faltering for a brief second before returning. "Even if that were true," she said, trying to regain control, "it doesn't change the fact that you're standing before me as a defendant." "That's where you're mistaken, Judge," Marcus replied. "I'm actually here on official business. And after what you just said, that business now includes you." A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. The murmurs started again, louder this time. Judge Simmons shifted uncomfortably but quickly masked it with another scoff. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but I run this courtroom," she snapped. "You have no authority here." Marcus gave her a knowing smile. "That's where you're wrong, Judge," he said. "And you're about to find out just how wrong you are." Judge Simmons narrowed her eyes at Marcus, but a flicker of doubt crossed her face. She glanced at the ID again, as if willing it to be fake, but the official FBI emblem was unmistakable. The tension in the courtroom was thick. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, stealing a glance at Marcus, who now seemed in control. The audience whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Marcus and the judge. "You expect me to just take your word for it?" Simmons scoffed, gripping the edge of her bench. "This is my courtroom. I decide what happens here." Marcus remained calm. He turned slightly, addressing the bailiff. "I suggest you verify my credentials. Call the bureau. You'll find my authority outranks hers." His words were firm but measured. The bailiff hesitated. For the first time, Judge Simmons seemed genuinely unsettled. The bailiff looked at the judge, waiting for her reaction. Simmons waved a dismissive hand. "This is absurd," she muttered. "We're done here." She picked up her gavel, preparing to move on to the next case, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Actually, Judge," he said, stepping forward, "you're the one who's done." The words hit like a hammer. Simmons froze, her fingers tightening around the gavel. "Excuse me?" she hissed, her face turning red. Marcus pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. "This is a federal warrant," he said, unfolding it slowly for the entire courtroom to see. "For your arrest." The gasps in the room were deafening. The prosecutor nearly dropped his pen. The bailiff took an involuntary step forward, his eyes darting between Marcus and the judge. Simmons let out a dry laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is a joke," she muttered. "This has to be a joke." Marcus remained silent, letting the weight of his words settle. The bailiff, realizing the situation was serious, cautiously took the document from Marcus's hand, his eyes scanning the paper. Judge Simmons's smug expression began to fade as she watched the bailiff's face change. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. The power she had always wielded so effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. She was no longer the judge in control of the courtroom. Now she was the one on trial. Her hands clenched around her gavel as her face twisted in disbelief. The courtroom was no longer hers to control. The bailiff, after carefully scanning the warrant, looked up at her, his expression a mix of hesitation and duty. The silence was suffocating. Everyone in the room was waiting for what would happen next. "This is ridiculous," Simmons stammered, her voice no longer carrying the same authority. "You think you can just waltz in here and pull a stunt like this? I am a judge. I decide who gets arrested in my courtroom." Marcus didn't flinch. He simply crossed his arms and nodded toward the bailiff. "She's stalling. You've read the warrant. You know what needs to be done." The bailiff hesitated for a brief second before stepping forward. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I need you to stand up." Simmons let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, you can't." "Be serious," she snapped. "Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea how much power I have?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Not anymore." The tension in the room cracked like a thunderclap. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps as reality set in. Simmons's face drained of color. She looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. The prosecutor averted his gaze. The clerk kept typing. Even the officers in the back of the room stood still, waiting for what came next. The bailiff stepped closer. "Judge Simmons, please," he said, his voice slow but firm. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Simmons's hands trembled slightly. As she gripped the bench, "This isn't happening," she whispered, shaking her head. But then, as if flipping a switch, she straightened her posture and glared at Marcus. "You think you've won?" she spat. "This is just a mistake. I'll be back on this bench in no time. And when I am, you won't," Marcus cut in, his voice calm but final. "Your corruption ends today." The bailiff reached for his handcuffs. Simmons's breath hitched. For the first time in her career, she felt something she had never experienced before in her own courtroom. Fear. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom as the bailiff secured Judge Simmons's wrists. She flinched, her face contorted with disbelief and rage. The same authority she had abused for years was now being stripped away in front of everyone. The murmurs in the room grew louder, some in shock, others in quiet satisfaction. "This is a disgrace," Simmons hissed, struggling against the cuffs. "You have no right to do this to me." Marcus remained calm, watching as the once powerful judge was led away from her own bench like any other criminal. "You abused your position for too long," he said, stepping forward. The law doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people. The prosecutor, still stunned, adjusted his tie before standing. Given the circumstances, he said carefully, I believe this case should be dismissed immediately. The gavel, no longer in Simmons's hands, was brought down by a substitute judge. Case dismissed. As Marcus turned to leave, the crowd erupted in applause. He walked out of the courtroom victorious, knowing justice had finally been served.